My name is Cordelia Blackwood, and at 72 years old, I thought I had seen every kind of betrayal life could offer. I was wrong. What my own daughter-in-law and son did to me in the weeks following my husband's funeral would make your blood boil. They thought they were dealing with a grieving, helpless widow. They had no idea they were about to tangle with someone who had spent 50 years building an empire they knew nothing about. You see, when someone steals from you, they're not just taking your possessions, they're stealing pieces of your history, your memories, your very soul. But when family does it, when they look you in the eye and lie while planning your destruction, that's when you realize that sometimes the people closest to you are the most dangerous predators of all. Before I tell you how I made them pay for their greed, I want you to know that this story has more twists than you can imagine. If you've ever been betrayed by family, or if you love stories about justice being served, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. And if you've faced something similar, family members who thought they could take advantage of you, share your story in the comments below. We feature real stories from our community, and your experience might help someone else, trust me. After you hear what Helena and Marcus did next, you'll have plenty to say. Now, let me take you back to that grey October morning in Millbrook Harbour, Maine, when everything began to unravel. The funeral reception had ended 3 days ago, but the weight of loss still hung heavy in our Victorian home overlooking Penobscot Bay. Theodore and I had lived here for 47 years, raising our son Marcus, building our life together. Now the house felt too big, too quiet, filled with nothing but memories and the salt-tinged Maine air that drifted through the windows. I was sitting in Theodore's study, sorting through his papers, when I heard the front door open. Marcus's voice carried down the hallway, followed by the sharp click of Helena's designer heels on the hardwood floors. My daughter-in-law had a way of making every entrance sound like a declaration of war. Mother Blackwood, Helena called, her voice saccharine sweet. She only used that tone when she wanted something. We need to talk. They found me in the study, Marcus looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit. Helena perfectly composed as always. She was a striking woman, tall, blonde, with the kind of calculated beauty that came from years of yoga classes and spa treatments, but her eyes, those pale blue eyes, they were as cold as the October wind off the bay. We've been thinking, Helena began, settling into the leather chair across from Theodore's desk without being invited to sit, about your situation, my situation, as if my husband's death was merely an inconvenience to be managed. Marcus shifted nervously. What Helena means is, we're worried about you, Mom. This house is so big, and you're here all alone now. I folded my hands in my lap, watching them both carefully. Theodore always said I had a gift for reading people, for seeing the truth behind their masks. Right now, I was seeing something I didn't like. I appreciate your concern, I said quietly, but I'm managing just fine. Helena leaned forward, her smile sharp as broken glass. But are you, really? I mean, let's be practical here. The maintenance on this place must be astronomical. The property taxes, the utilities, the upkeep, and it's not like Theodore left you with much of an income. The lie came so smoothly, so confidently, that for a moment I almost admired her audacity. Theodore had been a successful maritime lawyer, and between his practice and our investments, we had built substantial wealth over the decades, but Helena had no way of knowing the true extent of our finances, or so she thought. We've been looking at some lovely assisted living communities, Marcus added quickly, places where you'd have company, activities, people to look after you. And Helena continued, we could help you sell this place, take that burden off your shoulders. Marcus and I have been talking to a real estate agent, and she thinks we could get at least $2 million for the property. Can you imagine? Or that money just sitting here in walls and windows when you could be living comfortably somewhere more suitable. The word stung, but I kept my expression neutral. They wanted my home, my sanctuary, the place where I had loved and laughed and raised my child. They wanted to warehouse me somewhere convenient while they cashed in on my life. And your jewelry, Helena added, almost as an afterthought. All those beautiful pieces Theodore gave you over the years, they're just sitting in boxes now, aren't they? Such a shame for them to go unworn. We could help you find buyers for those too. Turn all that sentiment into something practical. My jewelry, my grandmother's pearls. The sapphire necklace Theodore had given me for our 25th anniversary. The emerald bracelet he'd surprised me with after Marcus was born. Each piece told a story, held a memory, carried the weight of love across decades. I looked at my son, searching his face for some sign of the boy I had raised. The man who used to bring me wildflowers and tell me I was the most beautiful mother in the world, but all I saw was weakness. The familiar look of someone who had let his wife make all the decisions for so long that he'd forgotten how to think. For himself, I need time to consider this, I said finally. Helena's smile tightened. Of course, but don't take too long. Mother Blackwood, these opportunities don't wait forever. After they left, I sat alone in Theodore's study as the autumn sun set over the bay. The silence was deafening, but it gave me time to think, time to remember, and time to plan. That night, I couldn't sleep. I found myself in the basement, standing before Theodore's old safe, the one Helena and Marcus didn't know existed. Hidden behind a false panel in the stone foundation, it contained documents and assets I had never discussed with anyone except my late husband. The combination was our wedding date, and as the heavy door swung open, I was reminded of just how much my family didn't know about me. Inside were deeds to 3 rental properties in Bar Harbor, stock certificates worth over $1 million, and the documentation for Blackwood Maritime Holdings, a company I had quietly built over the past 15 years, purchasing and renovating historic properties along the Maine coast. But it was the jewelry that made me smile in the darkness. The real jewelry. You see, what Helena had seen upstairs were beautiful reproductions, convincing copies I'd had made years ago for security purposes. The real pieces, worth over $800,000, were here in the safe, along with insurance documentation and appraisals that would make even Helena's greedy little heart skip a beat. Theodore and I had always been careful with our wealth. We'd lived well, but not ostentatiously, preferring to invest wisely rather than flash our success around Millbrook Harbor like some kind of peacock display. It was a decision that had served us well over the years, allowing us to help others quietly and build something lasting for future generations. But now I realized our discretion had been a mistake. It had allowed Helena and Marcus to see me as vulnerable, as someone to be managed rather than respected. They thought I was just a lonely old widow with a big house and some pretty trinkets, ripe for manipulation. They had no idea they were dealing with a woman who had helped build a multi-million-dollar portfolio while they were busy spending their modest inheritance from Theodore's father on designer handbags and German sports cars. As I locked the safe and returned to the house proper, a plan began to form in my mind. It was risky, perhaps even cruel. But sometimes the only way to reveal someone's true nature is to give them exactly what they think they want. The next morning, I called my attorney, James Weatherby had been our family lawyer for 30 years, a sharp-minded man in his 60s who understood both the law and the delicate dynamics of family wealth. When I explained what I wanted to do, he was quiet for a long moment. Cordelia, he said finally, are you absolutely certain about this? What you're proposing, it could backfire spectacularly. James, I replied, settling back in the chair across from his mahogany desk. I've been married to a lawyer for 47 years. I know the risks, but I also know my son and his wife. This is the only way to show Marcus what Helena really is before she destroys our family completely. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. James would draft a new will, one that left everything to Marcus and Helena: the house, the reproduced jewelry, even a fictional inheritance from a recently deceased great-aunt that would be worth approximately $3 million. But there would be conditions. They had to sell the jewelry within 60 days and use the proceeds to pay for my care at whatever assisted living facility they chose. The catch: the fictional inheritance would only be released after the jewelry sale was completed and documented. It was a test, pure and simple. Would they honor my wishes and ensure I was properly cared for? Or would they pocket the money and abandon me to whatever cheap facility they could find? And if they failed the test, James asked, then the real will goes into effect, the one that leaves everything to the Millbrook Harbor Historical Society, with a modest trust fund to ensure I can remain in my home for the rest of my life. James shook his head but began drafting the documents. Your husband would have appreciated this, he said with a wry smile. Theodore always did say you were the shrewdest person he knew. That afternoon, I called Marcus and asked him to come by the house. He arrived with Helena. As I'd expected, they sat in the living room, trying to look concerned and caring while their eyes catalogued everything they hoped to inherit. I've been thinking about what you said, I began, noting how Helena leaned forward eagerly, about selling the house, about the assisted living community, and you're right. I can't maintain this place on my own. Marcus looked relieved. Helena looked triumphant. I've had James draft some papers, I continued, watching their faces carefully. I'm leaving everything to you both, the house, my jewelry, everything. But I do have one small request, of course, Mother Blackwood. Helena said quickly, anything. I'd like you to sell the jewelry. First, use that money to pay for my care at whichever facility you choose. It seems fitting, somehow, that Theodore's gift should ensure I'm comfortable in my final years. That's very reasonable, Marcus stammered. Helena was practically glowing. We'll find you the most beautiful place, I promise. Somewhere with gardens and activities and wonderful people your age. As if 72 was ancient. As if I was already 1 foot in the grave. There's just one thing, I added casually. There's also an inheritance coming from my great-aunt Millicent in Boston, $3 million. But the estate won't release it until after the jewelry is sold and the care arrangements are finalized. Legal complications, you understand. I watched the greed bloom in Helena's eyes like a poisonous flower. $3 million, added to the house sale and the jewelry, they were looking at a windfall of nearly $6 million. We'll take care of everything, Helena assured me, reaching over to pat my hand with mock affection. You won't have to worry about a thing. As they left that evening, already whispering excitedly about their newfound fortune, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and anticipation. Soon, I would know exactly what kind of people I was dealing with. And more importantly, Marcus would know too. 2 weeks later, Helena called with news about Sunset Manor, an assisted living facility she'd found just outside Portland. The way she described it, you'd think she was offering me a luxury resort rather than a warehouse for inconvenient elderly relatives. It's perfect for you, she gushed over the phone. They have bingo nights and craft classes. The rooms are cozy and efficient, and the best part, it's only $3,000 a month. Very reasonable. $3,000 a month. I had done my research on Sunset Manor. It was indeed $3,000 a month. For a shared room in a facility with more health code violations than actual health services. The cozy and efficient rooms were barely large enough for a single bed and a dresser. The craft classes consisted of poorly supervised activities with safety scissors and construction paper. Meanwhile, the jewelry sale proceeds from the reproductions. which a legitimate appraiser had valued at just over $100,000, would cover nearly 3 years at a quality facility that charged $8,000 per month, the difference, approximately $60,000. Would presumably disappear into Helena and Marcus's bank account. That sounds lovely, I told her, injecting just the right note of grateful bewilderment into my voice. When would I move in? Well, we've already paid the first month's deposit, Helena said. You could move in this weekend if you'd like. We'll help you pack, of course. Just the essentials. They provide linens and most of the furniture, just the essentials. 72 years of life reduced to whatever could fit in a few suitcases. And the jewelry sale? I asked. Oh, that's all taken care of. We found a lovely dealer in Portland who specializes in estate pieces. He's offered us $95,000 for the entire collection. We'll have the check by Friday, $95,000, even for reproductions. They were being cheated. But I suspected Helena had chosen this particular dealer for reasons that had nothing to do with getting the best price. Probably someone who dealt in cash and didn't ask too many questions about paperwork. That evening, I sat in Theodore's study, looking out at the bay as the sun set behind the distant islands. Soon this view would belong to strangers. Soon this house would be filled with other people's laughter, other people's memories, if my plan failed, if Marcus couldn't see what his wife truly was. I would lose everything that mattered to me, but if it succeeded, well, that was a different story entirely. Friday came with a cold rain that turned the fallen leaves into a slippery carpet across the driveway. Helena and Marcus arrived early, both practically vibrating with excitement despite their attempts to look solemn and caring. The paperwork is all complete, Helena announced, waving a folder triumphantly. $95,000, just as promised, and we've arranged for the moving truck to come Monday morning. Marcus handed me a check, not for the full amount, I noticed, but for $36,000, exactly what would be needed to cover 3 years at Sunset Manor, if you rounded up generously. Where's the rest? I asked quietly. Helena and Marcus exchanged a glance. Well, Helena said with a laugh that didn't quite ring true, there were expenses, the dealer's commission, the appraisal fees. Some legal costs for the estate paperwork. You know how these things add up. I knew exactly how these things added up. The dealer's commission on a $95,000 sale would be roughly 10%. Appraisal fees might run a few $100. Legal costs for a simple estate jewelry sale shouldn't exceed $1,000 at most. They were stealing nearly $50,000 from their own family member, but I simply nodded and folded the check carefully, tucking it into my purse. I understand, I said. Thank you for handling all of this for me. Now, Helena continued briskly, about Monday. We'll be here at 8 a.m. sharp with the truck. I've made a list of what you'll need at Sunset Manor. She handed me a single-typed page. Everything else will go into storage until we can sort through it properly. The list was heartbreaking in its brevity. 1 suitcase of clothing, a few photographs, 1 small jewelry box for sentimental pieces, no books, no artwork, no furniture, nothing that would make a sterile room feel like home. What about Theodore's things? I asked. We'll handle all of that, Marcus said quickly. You don't need to worry about it, Mom. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about the man I'd loved for nearly 50 years. Don't worry about preserving his memory. Don't worry about anything, except being grateful for their generosity in warehousing me somewhere I couldn't interfere with their plans. As they left, Helena paused at the door. Oh, and Mother Blackwood. The inheritance from your great-aunt should come through within the next month. James said he'd have all the paperwork finalized by then, after their car disappeared down the winding drive. I allowed myself one moment of pure rage. They had looked me in the eye and stolen from me. They had reduced my life to a single page of approved items. They had relegated me to a substandard facility while pocketing money that should have ensured my comfort. Tea and dignity, but my moment of anger passed. Quickly replaced by something colder and far more dangerous. They thought they had won. They had no idea the game was just beginning. Sunday evening, the night before my scheduled exile to Sunset Manor, brought an unexpected visitor. My granddaughter Emma knocked on the door just as I was making my final preparations. At 28, she had always been the light of my life, Theodore's eyes in a face that reminded me of my own mother, with a quick wit and a kind heart that made her impossible not to love. But tonight, Emma looked uncomfortable, even guilty. As she stood in my doorway holding a bottle of wine and wearing an expression I'd never seen. "Before Grandma Cordelia," she said, kissing my cheek with less warmth than usual. "I thought we could have one last dinner together before tomorrow." I invited her in. Noticing how her eyes swept the living room with an appraising look that reminded me uncomfortably of her stepmother. Emma's own mother had died when she was 12, and Helena had stepped into the role with what I'd always thought was genuine affection. Now I wondered if that relationship had been as calculated as everything else Helena did. Over dinner, Emma seemed distant, distracted. She picked at her food and drank more wine than usual, asking careful questions about my decision to move to Sunset Manor. "It's really for the best, isn't it?" she said, not meeting my eyes. "I mean, this house is so big, and you're all alone now." Helena showed me the brochures for the facility. "It looks very nice." Helena had shown her the brochures. "Of course she had, Emma," I said carefully. "What do you think about all this?" "Really?" She was quiet for a long moment, twirling pasta around her fork without eating it. Finally, she looked up at me with eyes that were both defiant and ashamed. "I think you're being selfish," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "Dad is trying to take care of you, and Helena is working so hard to find you a nice place to live, and all you can do is complain about it. Do you have any idea how stressful this has been for them? How much time and effort they've put into handling your affairs, my affairs, as if my life was a burden they were graciously shouldering, and the money from the jewelry sale," she continued, gaining steam now, "that's going directly to your care. They could have kept it, used it for their own family. But they're making sure you're provided for instead." I stared at my granddaughter, this child I had loved and supported through college, through her first heartbreak, through every milestone and crisis of her young life. Helena had gotten to her, filled her head with lies and half-truths, painted me as an ungrateful burden rather than a woman being robbed by her own family. "They told you about the jewelry sale?" I asked quietly. "Of course they did. They wanted me to understand how generous they were being, how much they cared about your welfare." Emma's voice carried a note of criticism that cut me to the bone. "Sometimes I think you don't appreciate how lucky you are to have people who love you enough to make these hard decisions. Hard decisions, that's what they were calling theft now, Emma," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Has it occurred to you to ask why they're in such a hurry, why everything has to happen so quickly?" She pulled her hand away. "Because you can't take care of yourself anymore, Grandma, because living alone in this big house isn't safe for someone your age. Because they're trying to do the right thing, even though it's painful for everyone involved. Someone my age." She was talking about me as if I was already suffering from dementia, as if I was incompetent to make my own decisions at 72. I was healthier and sharper than most people half my age. But Helena had clearly painted a different picture. "What exactly did Helena tell you about my condition?" I asked. Emma looked uncomfortable again. "She said you've been struggling since Grandpa Theodore died, that you've been confused sometimes, forgetful, that you've been making poor financial decisions, and that someone needs to step in before You lose everything, confused, forgetful, poor financial decisions. The lies were so comprehensive, so carefully constructed, that I almost admired their efficiency. Helena had created an entirely fictional narrative about my mental state, one that justified every action they were taking, and you believed her. I wanted to see for myself. Emma said defensively, "That's why I'm here. But honestly, Grandma, you do seem different since the funeral. More, I don't know, suspicious of everyone, paranoid." Maybe paranoid, the word hung in the air between us like a slap. As Emma left that night, she hugged me with what felt like pity rather than love. "I'll visit you at Sunset Manor," she promised. "Once you get settled in, I think you'll be much happier there." After she was gone, I sat alone in my empty house, surrounded by boxes and the ghosts of a lifetime my own granddaughter had been. Turned against me, convinced that I was losing my mind, that I was a burden to be managed rather than a person to be respected. Helena hadn't just stolen my jewelry and my home. She had stolen my family's love and trust. But as I looked around at the life I was about to lose, I felt something shifting inside me. The sadness was still there, the sense of betrayal still burned like acid in my chest. But underneath it all was something harder, something that glittered. Like winter ice in moonlight, tomorrow they would come for me with their moving truck and their false concern. They would pack up my life and ship me off to their warehouse for inconvenient relatives. They would divide up my possessions and congratulate themselves on their generosity. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Monday morning arrived grey and cold, with the kind of October chill that seeps into your bones and stays there. The moving truck pulled into my driveway at exactly 8 a.m., followed by Marcus's BMW and Helena's white Mercedes. They were nothing if not punctual in their betrayal, but they weren't the only ones who had arrived early. James Weatherby's car was already parked at the end of the driveway, and through my kitchen window I could see him making his way up the front walk with his leather briefcase and an expression that suggested he was looking forward to what was about to happen. Helena was the first through the door, dressed in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people spent on rent. She surveyed the packed boxes with satisfaction, already mentally redecorating my home. "Good morning, Mother Blackwood," she chirped. "Are you all ready for your big move?" "Almost," I said calmly. "But there's been a slight change of plans." Marcus appeared behind her, looking tired and stressed. "What kind of change, Mom?" "Well, James needs to speak with you both about the inheritance from Great-Aunt Millicent, apparently. There's been some confusion about the documentation." Helena's smile flickered. "What kind of confusion?" James chose that moment to knock on the door, and I let him in with a sense of ceremony that the occasion deserved. He nodded politely to Marcus and Helena, then set his briefcase on the dining room table and began removing documents. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding about Mrs. Blackwood's estate planning," he said in his crisp, professional voice. "It seems that the will you've been operating under isn't actually valid." The color drained from Helena's face. "What do you mean, not valid?" "I mean," James continued, "that there never was a Great-Aunt Millicent. There is no $3 million inheritance coming from Boston, and most importantly, Mrs. Blackwood's actual will leaves everything to the Millbrook Harbor Historical Society." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Helena's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and finally, raw fury. Marcus just looked stunned, as if someone had hit him with a baseball bat. "That's impossible," Helena said, her voice rising dangerously. She signed papers. "We have documents. You have documents for a fictitious will," James explained patiently. "A test, if you will, to see what you would do when given control over Mrs. Blackwood's affairs." I stepped forward, enjoying the moment despite the pain it was causing. "I wanted to see if you would honor my wishes." If you would use the jewelry money to ensure I was properly cared for, instead, you stole nearly $60,000 and tried to warehouse me in a substandard facility. Helena whirled on me, all pretense of affection gone. You manipulative old witch. Do you have any idea what we've been through, planning for your care, arranging everything, arranging to steal from me, I corrected, the jewelry you sold? Those were reproductions worth maybe $5,000 total. You were so eager to get your hands on what you thought was my money that you never bothered to have them properly appraised. Marcus finally found his voice. Mom, what are you saying? I walked to the old secretary desk in the corner and retrieved a folder I'd prepared for this moment. I'm saying that your wife convinced you to defraud your own mother. The real jewelry is worth over $800,000 and is safely locked away. The house is worth closer to $3 million than $2 million, thanks to recent property assessments, and Blackwood Maritime Holdings, a company I built over the past 15 years, has assets worth approximately $4 million. I spread the documents across the table: property deeds, stock certificates, bank statements, insurance policies. A lifetime of careful planning and wise investment that Helena and Marcus had never bothered to learn about. You were so convinced I was a helpless old woman that you never asked the right questions. I continued. You assumed my grief made me vulnerable, that Theodore's death left me with nothing but sentiment and a big empty house. Helena was beyond fury now, her face twisted with rage. You planned this, you set us up. I gave you a choice, I said quietly. You could have used that jewelry money to ensure I lived with dignity and comfort. You could have chosen a quality facility that would have honored both Theodore's memory and your obligations as family. Instead, you chose to steal from me and abandon me to the cheapest warehouse you could find. Marcus was staring at the documents, his face pale with shock. Mom, I didn't know. Helena said you needed help, that you were struggling financially. Your wife lied to you, I said, not without sympathy, just as she lied to Emma, convincing her that I was losing my mind and that you were being generous by taking control of my affairs. Where does this leave us? Marcus asked quietly. James answered for me. Mrs. Blackwood is prepared to honor the original terms of the fictitious will, with modifications, if the stolen money is returned. If proper arrangements are made for her care should she ever need it, and if certain other conditions are met, she'll consider reinstating you in her actual will. Helena laughed bitterly. Other conditions? What other conditions? I looked at my daughter-in-law, this woman who had poisoned my family with her greed, and felt something settle into place inside my chest. Helena leaves, I said simply. She leaves this family. She leaves my son, and she never comes back. Marcus can choose to go with her or stay and try to rebuild what she's destroyed, but I won't have her manipulating and lying and stealing from us anymore. The explosion I expected never came. Instead, Helena went very still, very quiet, and when she finally spoke, her voice was like ice. You think you've won something here, you pathetic old woman? You think Marcus will choose you over me? She turned to my son, her beautiful face twisted with emotion. Tell her, Marcus, tell your mother that she can't make you choose between us. Tell her that we're a team, that what's hers will be ours. Eventually anyway, and in that moment, I saw my son's face change. I saw him really look at his wife, perhaps for the first time in years. I saw him hear what she was actually saying. Not that she loved him, not that they were a family worth fighting for, but that I was just an obstacle standing between them and my money. Get out, Marcus said quietly. What? Get out, he repeated, louder this time. Get out of my mother's house. Get out of my life. Get out. Helena stared at him in shock. Marcus, you can't be serious after everything we've built together. Everything we have planned, everything we have planned. Marcus stood up, and I saw something in his posture that reminded me of Theodore. a strength I hadn't seen in years. You mean everything you have planned. I just went along with it because I was too weak to think for myself. The moving truck was still idling in the driveway, and Helena looked at it like a lifeline. Fine, she said, gathering her purse and her dignity. Fine, but don't think this is over. Don't think you can just throw away 10 years of marriage and walk away clean. James will handle the divorce proceedings, I said calmly, and given the attempted fraud, I don't think you'll find the courts particularly sympathetic to claims on Marcus's future inheritance. After Helena left, her Mercedes spitting gravel, as she tore down the driveway, Marcus and I sat in the sudden quiet of my living room. The moving boxes surrounded us like monuments to a plan that would never be completed. I'm sorry, Mom, he said finally. I'm so sorry for all of this. I reached over and took his hand, feeling the calluses from his weekend sailing, the familiar warmth of my child's touch. I know you are, sweetheart, and I'm sorry too for the deception, but I had to know who you really were underneath all her influence. What happens now? I looked around my home, at the life Theodore and I had built together, at the future I would now get to keep. Now we heal, I said. And we make sure Emma knows the truth about what really happened here, ladies. What you've just heard is a story about family, betrayal, and the courage to fight for what's right. If you've ever been underestimated because of your age, or if you've dealt with family members who thought they could take advantage of you, please share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else who's facing a similar situation. We feature real stories from our community every month, and your voice matters. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We have more stories of justice and empowerment coming every week. 3 months later, I was sitting in my kitchen, watching the winter waves crash against the rocks below, when Emma knocked on my door. She looked different, older somehow, sadder, but also cleaner, as if she'd washed away something that had been staining her soul. Grandma, she said. And I heard the little girl she used to be in that single word. I came to apologize. I made us tea, and we sat at the table where I'd shared so many meals with Theodore, where I'd helped Emma with her homework, where I'd planned the elaborate revenge that had saved my family from destruction. Dad told me everything, she said, her hands wrapped around her mug like it was anchoring her to the present. About Helena, about the lies, about what they were planning to do to you. I feel so stupid, so ashamed that I believed her. Helena is very good at manipulating people, I said gently. She had years of practice on all of us. But I should have known better. I should have trusted you. You've never lied to me, never given me reason to doubt you. And I let a stranger convince me that you were losing your mind. I reached across the table and took her hands in mine. Emma, you were protecting someone you thought needed protection. Your heart was in the right place, even if you were working with bad information. We talked for hours that day about Helena's lies, about Marcus's weakness, about the ways that family relationships can become twisted when greed enters the picture. Emma told me about conversations she'd had with Helena, subtle suggestions that I was becoming forgetful, that I was making poor decisions, that someone needed to step in for my own good. She was so convincing, Emma said. She made it sound like love, like she was trying to protect you from yourself. That's how the best manipulators work, I explained. They make you think their cruelty is kindness, their theft is generosity. They convince you that up is down and black is white until you can't trust your own perceptions anymore. As winter turned to spring, my family began to heal. Marcus filed for divorce, and Helena left Millbrook Harbour for good, taking nothing but her clothes and her car. She tried to fight the prenuptial agreement, but James had done his work well, and she had no claim on any property or assets that predated their marriage. Marcus moved back into his childhood bedroom for a while, helping me with the house maintenance and slowly rediscovering who he was without Helena's constant influence. We talked about Theodore. About the man Marcus remembered as his father versus the weak figure Helena had painted him as. Always claiming Theodore had been impractical with money and too trusting for his own good, the truth was, Theodore had been brilliant with investments and had built our wealth through careful planning and wise deck decisions. Helena had rewritten that history to make her own financial manipulations seem necessary. But now Marcus could see his father clearly again. Emma began visiting every Sunday for dinner, bringing stories from her job at the Portland Art Museum, and occasionally a young man she was dating, a kind, honest teacher who reminded me of Theodore. At that age, she had learned to trust her own judgment again, to value authenticity over charm. On a warm day in late May, exactly 8 months after Theodore's funeral, I called them both to the house for a special occasion. James Weatherby was there too, along with a photographer from the Millbrook Harbor Gazette and the president of the Historical Society. I've decided, I announced, to donate this house to the Historical Society after all, but not as my primary residence. I'm turning it into the Theodore Blackwood Maritime Museum, celebrating the history of our harbor and the families who built their lives here. Marcus looked confused. But Mom, where will you live? I smiled and handed him a set of keys. In the carriage house, I'm having it renovated into a beautiful apartment overlooking the bay, close enough to oversee the museum, private enough to maintain my independence, and practical enough for whatever the future holds. The carriage house renovation would cost nearly $200,000. But it would give me a home designed for aging in place while preserving the main house for future generations. More importantly, it would ensure that Theodore's memory lived on in a meaningful way, that our home continued to serve the community we had loved so much, and I continued producing a new will from James's briefcase. I'm leaving Blackwood Maritime Holdings to you, Marcus, with the understanding that you'll use it to support the museum and continue building affordable housing along the coast. Emma will inherit the remaining investments, with instructions to use them for arts education and historic preservation. But the most important gift wasn't money or property. It was the lesson we had all learned about the difference between love and manipulation, between family loyalty and enabling destructive behavior. Helena taught us something valuable, I said as we stood on the front porch, looking out over Penobscot Bay. She showed us that blood isn't enough to make a family. Real family is built on respect, honesty, and genuine care for each other's well-being. She also showed us that you can't let people walk all over you just because they're family. Emma added with a wry smile, Grandma, what you did was brilliant, scary, but brilliant. Marcus put his arm around my shoulders. I still can't believe you had a whole business empire we never knew about. Your father and I believed in being prepared for anything, I said. We also believed that real wealth isn't about showing off, it's about having options, about being able to help people you love, about building something that lasts. As the sun set over the harbor that evening, painting the water gold and orange, I felt Theodore's presence in the salt breeze, in the cry of the gulls, in the solid weight of the house behind me. He would have been proud of how I had handled Helena's betrayal. More importantly, he would have been proud of how our family had found its way back to each other. 6 months later, the Theodore Blackwood Maritime Museum opened to the public. The opening ceremony was attended by half of Millbrook Harbor, including several families whose own histories were now preserved in our exhibits. Emma had curated a beautiful display about the role of women in Maine's maritime history, featuring stories of wives and mothers who had built businesses and maintained families while their husbands were at sea. I stood in what had once been our living room, now transformed into a gallery showcasing the evolution of the harbor from Native American fishing grounds to modern working waterfront. And I realized that Helena's greed had ultimately given me the greatest gift of all, the chance to turn our private happiness into something that would serve the community forever. The real jewelry, Theodore's grandmother's pearls, the sapphire necklace from our 25th anniversary, the emerald bracelet that had celebrated Marcus's birth, now resided in a climate-controlled display case. Part of an exhibit about the symbolism of family heirlooms in maritime communities, visitors could read the stories behind each piece, understanding them not as mere wealth but as tangible connections between past and present. Love made manifest in precious stones and precious metals. As I locked up the museum on that first evening, I paused in the doorway to look back at the rooms where I had lived and loved and nearly lost everything. The afternoon light streamed through the windows Theodore had installed to capture the best views of the bay, illuminating the displays that told our community's story. Helena had wanted to turn my memories into money, to reduce a lifetime of love to assets on a balance sheet. Instead, her betrayal had forced me to find a way to transform private grief into public celebration. Personal history into community treasure, I walked slowly to my new home in the carriage house, my keys jingling in the evening air, thinking about the strange paths that lead us to wisdom at 73. I had learned that the greatest revenge isn't destroying your enemies, it's building something so beautiful from the wreckage of their betrayal that their cruelty becomes irrelevant behind me. The museum stood solid and welcoming against the darkening sky, ready to share Theodore's story and mine with generations not yet born. Ahead of me lay my cozy apartment with its view of the harbour, my books, my tea, and the comfortable solitude of someone who has fought for her dignity and won. Helena had thought she was stealing my future. Instead, she had given me the chance to build a legacy that would outlast us all.